Hello and welcome to the Mastercam 2022 rollouts. My name is Patrick Filipek and I'm an applications engineer for Prototech Engineering. Today's topic here is going to be 2022 update. So just some information on how to update Mastercam correctly and to get all the migration done correctly. We'll then move on to software license borrowing. This is something new we added into Mastercam. And then any topics for Lathe, Swiss, and MIllTurn that have been updated for 2022. So let's go ahead and get started here. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is just miscellaneous updating to 2022 topics. We have a migration wizard inside of Mastercam, and we also will talk about sharing files on the network. So our migration wizard, anytime you're coming from an older version of Mastercam to the new version of Mastercam, we want to make sure that we're getting them files migrated, and that's migrating your post and your machine dev, control dev tool libraries, so everything works correctly in the next version. We'll go over a couple examples of this on our next slide here. And then one to the right, sharing files on the network. We have utilities to do this for you automatically. The time you're sharing files on the network is typically multiple users of Mastercam. We like to have the shared file in one location so everybody's accessing the same one to kind of streamline the Mastercam process so everybody is seeing the same data. And after we're done here, just make sure to access all the documentation on updating for 2022, you can just log right on to www.prototech-engineering.com and you can download all the setup guides from there, along with a bunch of our training information, any other information for Prototech. So let's go ahead. We're going to take a look at a blank Mastercam screen, and the migration is held up into the file convert, and it is called the migration wizard. Inside of here you're going to have two modes here. You're going to have a basic and you're going to have an advanced. I'm going to show you the advanced. The basic would be really if you're not sharing anything on the network, you're just all local, working on the local C drive. But in this case here we're going to go to the advanced button. In here we have an option to pick the shared Mastercam files and the My Mastercam files. The shared Mastercam files are going to be your post files, tool libraries, machine definitions. The My Mastercam files are going to be your workspace, your screen colors, personal screen colors, and anything that has to do with how you have your Mastercam set up. In here you'll have a source folder and a destination folder. Obviously you're going to pick your source of what you're migrating from and where you're going to migrate to, and them are default locations on the screen right now. In here we have file types. Now we don't recommend you bringing all the file types over, so I like to unclick it here next to file types, and then I like to just pick what I want to bring over. Depending on what kind of machines you are, there may be some files in here that you're going to want. Typical migration is operation libraries, control definitions, tool libraries, machine definitions, and post files. That's going to be a basic one. But like I said, as you can see there, if you have wire machines or MIllTurn machines, there are options for you to bring them corresponding files over. And one other one I like to talk about here is miscellaneous data files. If you are using a bought and post from us, from Postability specific, they require that there is a .dat file that is included with their post for licensing. You want to make sure that you're going to be migrating them also, so they come over and your post has no issues going forward with licensing. Versions, depends which version you're coming from. You can update all the way from 2019 to 2022 Mastercam. If you have an older version than that you are using now, we will have to help you with migration. And once again, you can contact us at support@prototech-engineering.com to get some help from us. And then you would just finish this off. I'm not going to migrate in this case. I already have mine migrated, and that's all that you have to worry about with the migration of Mastercam. The next thing I want to talk about here is a software license borrow utility. So Mastercam added this after the COVID pandemic. A lot of people could not work at work anymore, and they had to go home, and that created quite a few issues potentially for them license-wise. So if you are using a software network license, you will be able to utilize this license borrow utility if you ever have to go home and work from home for a while or work off-site. So the software license borrow utility is found in your program files, in common files, Mastercam licensing, and it's going to be a Mastercam license borrow utility.exe. Simply double click on it to access this. Once the license borrow utility pops up on your screen, you can go to options. Now options is going to allow you to say how long do you want to borrow this license for, and you can save it all the way up to 10 days max. You can't go past 10 days, and on the 10th day after it expires, it will release the license back, and it'll be available for anybody else to use. And how this works is when you run this, it'll show all the products that you currently have. You may not have all these products on the screen. It just depends what you have on. And it'll show you a total, and it'll show you an available. And in this case here, I have for Mastercam Mill, I have 2 available. And all I need to do is go and put a checkbox in what I want to borrow. In this case here, it was a Mastercam Lathe seat and a Mastercam Mill seat. And then on the bottom right, I can simply hit borrow license, and then I can hit yes. Now you will notice by that message in the middle that it says they are no longer available to other users. Once again, you are borrowing a license. You are not getting a free one, I guess you could say. So if you have one lathe seat and you borrow it and go home with it, the guys back at the shop will not be able to borrow a lathe license or use a lathe license. And as soon as you do that, it'll show you what you have borrowed and what is currently available, just for your reference here. And then let's say that you borrow it, you want to borrow it for 9 days, but after 5 days you're coming back to work and you can hook back into the network. You can always return these. So that's going to be back into the file options, and it's going to be a borrow tab or a return tab here, and you can select what license you want to return, and then on the bottom right, return the checked license or return all license. And then once you do that, the license will be back, and just like you were sitting back at work. So this is a really nice utility. Like I said, there's a lot of different scenarios here that people can get into. As far as not being able to be at work. Maybe it's a family emergency. Maybe there's other circumstances at work where you might have to work at home, and now this gives you the ability to unhook from your network and go work from home. So it's definitely, if you have a software network license, I would definitely check that out if you are in need of that. Next, we'll take a look at Mastercam's improvements to MIllTurn specifically, with some steady rest. And before we get there, just some facts, just so you know. Mastercam supports 84 different MIllTurn style machines. If you have a MIllTurn style machine that we support, each machine environment has full machine simulation. It also has a built-in sync manager to control movements on complex machines, and it enhances the job setup and loading of tools for streamlined job setup. MIllTurn is very easy to set up and very easy to control, so it is quite the nice product. Mastercam also supports 130 different Swiss style machines. You're not going to be running Swiss in the MIllTurn product. It's going to be done in our Lathe product. The syncing is done within the post, so in the miscellaneous values is where we sync positions. This is a very economical way to program complex Swiss machines through Mastercam. One thing with that, one note, you're not going to get full machine simulation, but you know, most Swiss users, you know, they can prove the code out on the machine pretty easily. So if you guys are looking for some Swiss machines or MIllTurn machines, definitely let us know. In 2022, Mastercam added programmable steady rest. That is now supported, so you can have turret mounted or fixed mounted steady rest that we can program in Mastercam, and we'll see an example of that today. A couple other things they did is you can pick an arc or a radial face for selection now. So just gives you a little more options. You have the little indicator there in the job setup page. And we can now generate retract operations in the center point operation, so you don't have to create an additional one. It'll automatically generate that and load that in below your center engagement. So that's kind of a nice one. That'll help us out as we go through. And on the bottom of the screen, bottom right, there's a little generate tool path switch. That is added in all the tool paths in Mastercam with 2022. And what that'll do, if that's checked, as soon as you green check out of there, you no longer have to regenerate. That'll automatically regenerate for you if that is switched. So that is a nice button that they added in 2022. Another thing we're going to talk about is Lathe and Swiss underutilized tool paths, specifically dynamic roughing and PrimeTurning. So there's a couple examples kind of on the screen, and dynamic roughing can be huge if you're doing a lot of hard material grooving. The strategy is essentially dynamic milling in lathe. And then PrimeTurning has been around for a while. PrimeTurning you get quite aggressive with, and you have a lot of say on the tool path. So we'll take a look at that today also. And why do we want to use possibly dynamic grooving or PrimeTurning? Well, time is money, and how can you save time? So these tool paths will save you some time. Dynamic grooving, it utilizes Mastercam's dynamic motion, so it rolls into the cut, rolls out of the cut, stays into the cut longer, and it's absolutely great for hard to cut materials. PrimeTurning, you can turn multi-directional, so to the chuck or away from the chuck. There's a very advanced insert design that they have created. Exceptional material removal rates. These can get going pretty fast. And the only kicker to this is you need to use specific Sandvik turn tools picked out of a free pre-built PrimeTurn tool database. So you just can't pick a stick tool out of your library. You have to go and download a specific Sandvik turn tool out of a library on Mastercam.com, or if you have loaded any of the latest versions, it is pre-built in there as an option for PrimeTurning tools. And on the bottom there's just a little bit of example of what you can get out of these tool paths. You know, double the speed and feed, longer lasting inserts, and you know, up to a 50% production increase possibly. And next is just going to be a video on PrimeTurning, just to kind of give you an example of what it does. A lot of people don't understand what it can do and how it works. This is a short little clip just to show you. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of these turning examples now. And first we'll start out with a MIllTurn steady rest option. So the first one here is actually a fixed mount. And before we get there, we'll actually look at this one here. So this one here, I haven't done anything with this file yet, so we're just going to do this from scratch. So I'm just going to pick a generic machine, a generic Fanuc TT machine. And we're going to do a job setup, and then we're going to kind of see how it sets up so you guys can kind of understand a little bit on where you need to go to set this up. So in here we have a new button now. It's called Work Support, and that is going to be a steady rest support. So in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and I can just left click on the lower turret, right click and select a new steady rest. Now if there's already one added, we can remove it from the list. And your component, in this case my component is already loaded. We can manually build these kind of like we did before with different components of the chuck and jaws. It's the same process, and we have some documentation we can help you with on that. So in this case here, I'm going to grab the turret mounted steady rest, and that's going to load it into my lower turret. My setup type here just for this example is just going to be a single piece of stock, and I'm just going to go ahead and pick it off. And my part geometry here, I'll go ahead and pick my part geometry and selection. And my stick out here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to pick some moderate numbers here so we can get some in. So I'm going to hold on to that, and I'm going to pick it off out here, and I'm going to use the steady rest to grab it and to drag it back. And I'll pick my pick off position to be there. So that's all we have to do. It's the same standard setup as before. We just have to define our work support here as how we want our steady rest defined. And we got our setup done here, so we got our jaws there. We're going to come and pick off here, pull that back, and then we'll do a facing op on the end on our right spindle. So up on top here, I'm going to go up to our part handling options here, and you'll see a couple new options in here as far as steady rest. And this one would be if you're going to move or clamp manually. We also have a steady rest here, which is based on a steady rest that's mounted on a turret. So we can have fixed steady rest and turret mounted steady rest. And in this case here, we're just going to come and do a pick-off. Now in the pick-off, we'll have our same options to utilize our steady rest. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my stream. So I'm going to say upper stream with a lower steady rest. You can see that you have the different options here and how you want that output. And inside of here, when I pick that strategy, now my position steady rest is in here. So I kind of want to give it a position where I want that steady rest to be when it goes and clamps the parts. We can just left click on here. Now we can go ahead and define this by clicking on this white arrow. And I'm just going to pick a position here to pre-position. I'm going to say, let's go there. And once again, this is just pre-locating this for our pick-off routine. And that's all I really have to touch in here. So if I go ahead and green check, it's going to go ahead and create this operation for me. So as you can see on the screen here, now we have a definition of a steady rest kind of in wireframe on the screen. And now we can come back, and we're just going to do a face op on the back, because that would be something you specifically would do. If you're grabbing way back here, you have no rigidity out here. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a facing op. And I'm going to do that on the upper right turret. And I'm just going to go ahead and green check out of there. So we have our tool path built. Now let's go ahead and we're going to select all of our ops here. And as you can see, my pick-off routine, like always, kicked out a whole bunch of operations as far as spindle sinking, clamping. But you're going to also see in here is there's a steady rest point, steady rest point, steady rest point, steady rest point. And that's going to position, clamp it, move it with the transfer. So once I come into the G1 button here and launch this out, we're going to have to do a little bit of work in the sync manager. So the sync manager pops up, and on my upper and my lower, I'm seeing all of my moves of my machine. So what I have here is I have my steady rest on the right side here. If I right click and go expand all operations, it expands it out for me. So now I got a little bit of work here to do and some syncing that I want to do. So first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that these sync points on the end of the fourth position move, I just want to make sure that's going on while it is unclamping operation number 5. And you can see it puts our syncs in there. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab my motion of steady rest point 12 and I'm going to move it down, and we are going to go to the home position of 11. Now what that'll do is that'll sync them up to make sure that our steady rest, when it transfers, is moving with it so it doesn't keep it behind. Otherwise you can imagine that that could be problematic. And then we're also going to sync the ends here, so we just make sure they make it to the same location at the same time. Anytime you're syncing the steady rest, it's very important to make sure that we get the sync points right so something isn't pulling while the other one is sitting there, and it should be moving. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to launch this into our simulator. And our simulator pops up. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this operation. And as you can see on the turret, we have a turret mounted steady rest. And now if I go ahead and run this, we'll see all the clamping being done. And there we go. That's going to position the upper turret in a safe position. Bring the steady rest in. Clamp. Now to bring our sub spindle in to pick off. In the orange color, there's a proximity alarm. It's really close, and that's what that is showing. And it drug it back with it. Now to go ahead and index our tool and face that operation off. So as you can see, that's quite a cool addition to be able to utilize steady rest in Mastercam MIllTurn. As I stated before, this is a turret mounted. I also have an example of a stationary mounted one, and here it is here. So that would be fixed, so it's not moving out of there, a little different style machine. And now if we watch this one run, this one's just a simple clamp and turn for some support out there. So we can support both sides. They're set up the same, with the exception of we're not setting this up in the pick-off POCO routine. We are going and manually setting this one, which I can show you a little bit of here next. And once I back out of here, as I said, we'll have our other part handling here. So if you go to steady rest, and I picked the wrong one, obviously every time. So it'll get into this. So now we can tell it what we want to do. You know, what's our type, motion points. We can add points, remove points here. And this is how you can manually define where to go and where to clamp. So that is an option in here now, and it's a great little addition. And there's their generate toolpath, which helps with workflow. Next, we'll take a look at some of the underutilized tool paths. So in this case here, I have this part and I have a deep groove in here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to program this with dynamic roughing. And you can find that in the turning tab, and it's going to be in the general tool path called dynamic rough. So if you come in here, the nice thing is if you have a solid on the screen, you no longer have to have a turn profile. I can just simply come in here and click my chain that I want to groove out. And I'm going to have to use a button tool. So you do have to use, you know, somewhat of a specific tool. This is a 3/8 button in this case. There are tools made for this. Pretty much every manufacturer has a tool that's with good side support that will take, you know, quite a beating in a lathe. So make sure you're getting the correct tools defined and used. The rest of this page is exactly the same as you're used to. Our dynamic rough parameters, there's really not a whole lot to set here. So our step over percentage, you know, I'm just gonna go, I'll go 15%, and that's going to give me a cut of 28 thou. You know, this is where you kind of got to do some research, maybe 15-20% step overs, maybe lighter if you're in really heavy cuts. Toolpath radius, that's the radius that it's going to loop in and loop out of. I'm just going to leave it at 50%. You want to save some time, maybe you could decrease that number. And this is a roughing op, so stock to leave an X and stock to leave an Z. Obviously, you'd want to set them accordingly. And then prevent upcutting. Upcutting specifically on a round button tool like we have, it'll prevent cuts going over center line on top of that or any cuts above that. So that is kind of just a safety switch in there. All your standard settings are going to be on the right hand side here that you're used to. And once again, I have a generate toolpath. If I go ahead and green check, and it'll regenerate automatically for me. I have a nice toolpath on the screen. Now if we go ahead and look at this and verify, this is a very nice toolpath to look at. As you can see, it scoops it out. So there is no plunging, there is no stabbing with the groove tool that can create some issues. This is just nice fluid motion, maintaining the chip all the way through. So that's a great and valuable toolpath that I just don't see used, because I think a lot of people are just kind of hanging out with the old stabbing style tool path, and that's what they're going with, but this can greatly reduce cycle time for you. Another tool path that I like to point out is that prime turning. So if I go ahead and clean up my screen here a little bit, here we have another part, and if I go to this machine group here, there we go, and reinitialize this, our stock will re-update here. So here's just a part that I have a lot of roughing to take out of there. You know, nothing terribly difficult here, but there's just a lot of material, and maybe this is hard material. So up on our general toolpath, once again, we have the option called prime turning. So if I go into prime turning, once again, I'm going to pick a chain. Now, typically, the way the inserts are designed, they're a radial chip thinning insert. They like to work chuck away, and we'll kind of see that as we go. So I'm going to pick this accordingly. I'm going to go chuck away. So I'm going to start towards the chuck and work my way out. Once we pop into here, you can only pick tools out of a pre-built library. And there's a bunch of different styles here. You have your A styles and you have your B style cutters here. And you're going to have quite the variety of a library made here depending on what tool you buy, which one you want to use. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to grab this tool here. No rhyme or reason. I'm just going to grab it. You'll notice that everything is kind of limited out here. You don't have speeds and feeds. You have a max spindle speed, and that is it. So that's one thing you will notice. We do have a rough, so we can rough with this or finish or vice versa. We have strategies. You have horizontal, vertical, horizontal then vertical, vertical then horizontal, or alternating. So you have a lot of options here to rough, depending on what you want to do. If I just leave this to a horizontal cut, it's just going to work left to right on my screen. If we go to a vertical, it's going to be obviously up and down on our screen. If we do a horizontal then vertical, it'll work horizontal until it gets down to a flat, and then it'll go do vertical cuts. And then the alternating is obviously alternating between the two. A lot of the same settings are in here from our typical roughing as far as overlap, depth cuts work the same, our entry and exit amounts work the same, stock to leave an X, stock to leave an Z move the same. All our compensation is the same, and you still have your tool inspection, lead in, lead out, plunge parameters on the right. One main difference here is going to be this feed rate button right here. If you go into this feed rate button, this is going to pop up a huge page, and it looks like a lot, but it's really nice because we could turn on just chip thickness, what we want, engagement angle, and maximum feed rate. If we wanted to do that, we could go ahead and use a feed rate. Once again, with our plunges, we have a chip thickness or a feed rate, and then we have a secondary feed rate and spindle speeds if we want to set that. So these are just going to be based off of what you're cutting for material and how fast you really want to go is what you're going to set here. Our finish parameters, pretty light in information here. You have another feed rate that's going to kick up a little smaller box just for the finish cut that you can control independently. And then you have all of your same stuff here as corner break, lead in, lead out, plunge parameters, chip break, tool inspection. And then if you want multiple finish passes, you can add them there with the finish step over and your stock to leave an X and Z. So there's really, this toolpath is very easy to use. There's not much to do here. Now, if you wanted to work from face into chuck, then you just chain it that way and the toolpath will work accordingly. So if I go ahead and green check out of here, I have this really nice looking toolpath that's going to scoop this out as it goes. And we'll see that toolpath come down. And there is that insert. And as you can see, the way the insert's designed, it can really take a heavy cut from the chuck back because of the way it's laying. If you're going the opposite way, you're probably not going to be able to achieve the same roughing speeds and feeds as you would going this way, as you can see. And that insert has a lot of geometry going on. It's very strong. When we did some test cuts with this where we pretty much tried to go as fast as we could. We had a chip that was approximately a ½ inch wide and turned red on us, and we pulled them inserts out and they looked brand new. So this is something, you know, depending on your situation, you might want to look into. And you can see it rolls into every cut and rolls out of every cut, and they are known for their plunging abilities, as you can see here as the cut is plunging in. That's what they're known for. So that is not abnormal, that is normal for this cut. So I would highly recommend trying these two out if you're not doing them, just to see if they can cancel out a little bit of cycle time for you, because they are quite impressive once you start using them. And I definitely hope you will.